They say it began in the cold breath of an October morning in 1811, in the thick, brooding woods of northern Vermont, where sunlight had to beg its way through the branches and the shadows lasted longer than they had any right to. A man named Elijah Dunbridge arrived with 2 boys, ages 7 and 9, their cheeks hollow and eyes older than they should have been, and with a wagon piled high with timber, tools, and a small iron lockbox no one ever saw him open. He spoke little, and when he did, his voice was dry and deliberate, as if each word had been weighed. The town of Advale, a quiet farming settlement not far from the Canadian border, watched as Elijah purchased a tract of land that had long been left untouched due to its density and the odd rock formations that jutted like broken teeth from the forest floor. No one had ever built there, not for lack of trying, but because the land refused it. Foundations cracked. Wells dried up. One farmer claimed the soil smelled of rust and salt, even though the sea was hundreds of miles away. But Elijah Dunbridge didn't ask permission, and he didn't seek help. He simply arrived, pitched a canvas tent for the boys, and began building with the sort of obsessive isolation that made townsfolk uneasy. He refused carpenters, rejected blueprints, and when asked what he was building, would only say, "A home that fits." The townspeople didn't know what he meant by that, but they didn't press. He wasn't rude, just distant, like he was always half listening to something only he could hear. Day by day, the house rose from the cursed ground, its bones made from old oak and mountain pine, harvested not from the surrounding forest but brought in on that first wagon. Wood that smelled too sweet, like something rotting under sugar. It began simply. A square foundation, a rectangular hall, a chimney that seemed to tilt slightly east no matter how often Elijah corrected it. But then strange additions appeared. A second floor materialized before the first was even sealed. Rooms jutted out at odd angles. A tower sprang up on the north wing, spiraling like it belonged to a lighthouse instead of a woodland estate. Locals who dared walk near, usually boys on dares, reported windows that blinked out overnight. A third staircase that hadn't existed the previous day, and most chillingly, the distinct sound of a hammer striking wood when no one was in sight. By the spring of 1813, the manor was complete, or rather, it stopped growing. Elijah called it Dunbridge House, though no sign ever marked the gate, and the locals called it the Crooked Hearth for the way smoke curled from every chimney, regardless of whether anyone was home. The final count was 23 rooms by all inventory. 7 bedrooms, 3 studies, 2 parlors, a kitchen, a grand dining hall, a small library, 2 cellars, a bathhouse, and a handful of halls and closets that didn't always seem to connect in logical ways. But there were whispers, quiet ones, the kind passed behind church pews and in hushed barroom corners, that anyone who spent the night inside the house always remembered one room more than the map said existed. Guests recalled a red door near the servants' stairwell that no one else had seen. Children claimed to find a sunlit playroom behind the linen closet. One parson swore he had found a chapel on the 3rd floor one morning, filled with candlelight and a black pulpit. But when he returned with Elijah, the corridor ended in a wall. And when they confronted Elijah, he would always smile, politely, thinly, and say, The house settles differently for everyone. It was a strange phrase, and no one knew quite what he meant. Over the next decades, Elijah raised his sons within its shifting walls, and both grew quiet and peculiar, much like Teach, here father. They never married. They rarely visited town. Once a month, Elijah would come to market alone, always with coin, always with a list. Salt, dried meats, books, ink, nothing indulgent. And he never lingered longer than necessary. When asked about the house, his answers were always curt, evasive. He would often glance over his shoulder, as if ensuring nothing from the woods had followed him. And once, when a young merchant joked about the extra-room rumors, Elijah's expression darkened like thunder. "It isn't extra," he said softly, eyes unfocused. "It's just not yours." The house, it seemed, had moods of its own, doors stuck only for some. Windows revealed different views depending on the hour. The northeast bedroom was always cold, regardless of season, and the library ceiling had a faint stain shaped uncannily like a face with an open mouth. Children who played near the woods spoke of figures in the windows, tall, unmoving, watching. A hunter once claimed to see the entire west wing vanish behind a curtain of fog, then reappear moments later as if nothing had happened. But perhaps the most disturbing detail came from the mail carrier, a stooped old man named Thaddeus Cole, who delivered once a week. He reported that on at least 3 separate visits he heard voices whispering from within the walls as he approached the porch, multiple voices, none of which matched Elijah's or his son's. He described the sounds as unintelligible, overlapping, like a prayer recited backward. "Like the house was remembering something," he said once, visibly shaken. And then came the night of Elijah's death, the winter of 1846, when a snowstorm buried the valley and no mail could reach for 3 weeks. When the storm cleared, townsfolk rode up to check on the old man. They found the house deathly silent, every curtain drawn, and not a single footprint in the snow. But the front door stood open, swinging gently, in the wind. Inside, they found Elijah Dunbridge seated in the east parlor, still upright in his favorite chair, every door in the house ajar, every candle melted to the wick, and his eyes wide with a terror that could not have been imagined. There was no sign of struggle, no blood, no injury, just a look of soul-shattering horror, as if he'd seen something in that last moment that unmade him. The sons were gone, no trace of them, not even footprints in the snow. Only one slipper, damp and muddy, was found in the upstairs hallway outside the linen closet. The townspeople didn't dare search too long. One man claimed he went down a hallway and came out in a part of the house he didn't recognize. Another swore the parlor had changed shape between his 2 visits. That same evening, the sheriff boarded the house, nailed every window shut, and posted a notice. "Property condemned. Do not enter." But no one needed convincing. The Dunbridge house was left to the woods, to the wind, and to whatever still wandered its halls. Yet even sealed and locked, the manor never stopped breathing. Travelers who passed by the old road claimed to see lights flickering behind the boarded windows. Once, a journalist from Boston came to investigate the story, spending 2 nights camped outside. On the 3rd, he vanished, leaving behind only a notebook filled with symbols that no one could translate. symbols later identified as matching the carvings found above the red door in the servants' hall, a door that officially never existed. And so the story lived on, that Elijah Dunbridge had not built the house entirely on his own, that something had guided his hands, shaped his dreams, whispered blueprints into his sleeping mind, that the house had always been one room too many, and that the 24th room, wherever it was, did not stay still. It moved. It watched. It waited. It remembered. They did not speak of the room, not openly, not even among themselves, and especially not outside the house, for fear that speaking it aloud would grant it attention, or worse, invitation. And yet, even as generations passed beneath the looming roof of the Dunbridge Manor, the presence of that extra, impossible room only deepened in its hunger and cruelty, as if with every soul born under that cursed name it grew more intelligent, more selective, more awake. After Elijah's death and the strange vanishing of his sons, the property passed into the hands of a nephew, Silas Dunbridge, a schoolteacher from Maine who inherited the house without enthusiasm and arrived with a reluctant wife and 3 children, all of whom seemed too pale for their age, as if something in their blood knew what was waiting long before their minds could understand. Silas, ever the rationalist, dismissed the rumors of shifting walls and missing rooms as nonsense, country superstition fueled by too many long winters and too few real answers about Elijah's final hours. He set about cataloging the manor, walking its halls with rulers and charcoal, attempting to produce a true map, one that could reconcile the contradictions. But by the 3rd night he'd already begun marking inconsistencies. A closet near the drawing room measured 4 feet wider on Tuesday than it had on Sunday. A stairwell he'd used that morning vanished by dinner. And, most troubling of all, a sealed door in the northern hall, previously thought to lead to the outside, was now flush with the inner corridor, bearing a small brass knob that no one remembered installing. He chalked it up to fatigue. The house was large, confusing, poorly lit, but his wife, Marian, did not adapt so easily. She took to sleeping in the nursery with all 3 children, insisting that she heard scratching in the walls near the headboard, and when asked to describe it, would say only that it was not an animal sound, but something that mimicked voices with just enough wrongness to make her stomach turn. Silas tried to soothe her, even as he began noticing things himself, like the mirror in his study, which on 2 occasions reflected rooms behind him that no longer existed when he turned around, or the way the children's toys rearranged themselves each morning into strange geometric shapes, complex spirals, and angular symbols that no toddler could have managed. And then, in March of 1849, the youngest child, Henry, vanished. One moment he was playing with blocks near the base of the grandfather clock, and the next he was simply gone. No creak of floorboards, no open door, only the faint smell of ash in the air and a single wooden block left behind, painted with the letter H and a small black fingerprint on its underside. Panic overtook the house. Every room was searched. Floors were pried up. The walls near the chimney were opened, revealing nothing but undisturbed beams and centuries-old dust. The door in the north hallway was now missing. Not closed. Gone. Silas, for all his reason and intellect, stopped sleeping. He scribbled notes constantly, cross-referencing floor plans and census records, even speaking to a medium from Montpellier despite his disbelief in the occult. But nothing helped. Henry was never found. And then came the dreams. First to Marian, then to the middle child, Eleanor, and eventually to Silas himself. Dreams of endless hallways lined with doors that pulsed like lungs. Dreams of a room bathed in violet light, without walls, only corners that bent impossibly into themselves, where something large and smiling waited just out of sight, always just behind the dreamer, breathing, humming a lullaby in a language older than stone. They began writing these dreams down, and soon the journal pages filled faster than they could be stored. The dreams grew more insistent. The eldest child, Thomas, stopped speaking entirely, instead drawing page after page of a house that had no outside, only rooms connecting to more rooms, like a maze folding in on itself forever. By the winter of 1852, Silas had aged 20 years in the span of 3. His eyes were hollow, his hands always shaking, and though he stayed in the house, he no longer referred to it as home. He told Marian one night while the snow beat against the panes that he believed the house had an interior logic, one not bound by earthly dimensions but by something else, something emotional, symbolic, perhaps even sacrificial. He claimed that the room, that original shifting room that had no place in Elijah's blueprint, was not static, not fixed in space, but instead tethered to attention, to perception, and most dangerously, to longing. "It feeds on observation," he whispered. "It exists more fully when it is feared." And so the family did the only thing they could. They tried to forget it. They closed off entire wings. They locked the basement door and buried the key. They left certain hallways in darkness and trained the children not to look too long at certain corners where the angles bent wrong. For a time, this worked. The dreams lessened. The rooms remained still. But then came Clara. Born in 1865 to Edwin Dunbridge, Silas's grandson, Clara was a gentle, quiet child with large eyes and a strange affinity for stillness. She hardly cried as a baby. She seemed always to be watching, always listening, and often she would go missing for hours, only to be found standing in the attic, staring at the wall, or sitting under the staircase, humming to herself. At first, the family dismissed it as imagination, but by age 7 she had begun sleepwalking. More than once, they found her outside, barefoot in the frost, her nightgown soaked, and her fingernails black with dirt. When asked where she had gone, she could never answer. Her drawings became increasingly troubling. Twisting towers, staircases that looped back into themselves, doors with too many knobs, and most disturbingly, figures with no faces standing behind windows that had no walls. Her father, Edwin, began to worry she was losing her mind, but he feared the truth even more, that she was simply seeing what the rest of them had trained themselves not to. One night in 1873, Edwin followed her. He waited until she rose from bed and crept down the hall, her eyes wide open but unseeing. He watched her pause before the linen closet, press her hand against the wood, and then somehow step through it. He rushed forward, but the door was gone. Only a wall remained. They searched the entire night, and the next. They pulled up floorboards, shattered mirrors, tore through the attic. Nothing. Clara was gone. But the following evening, as Edwin sat in the library, numb with grief and disbelief, a single page fluttered from the top shelf. It was her handwriting. A dozen times she had written the same phrase. It sees, it chooses, it wants company. And suddenly, Edwin understood. The room had taken her, not at random, not out of malice, but because she saw it. She listened. She heard its call. Over the next decade, others would follow. A cousin visiting from New York, a tutor from Boston who spent too long in the west parlor, a maid who fell asleep near the fireplace and woke up screaming, her eyes burned white and her mind broken. Each incident was documented, locked away in a cedar box in the attic, along with drawings, journal entries, and accounts of dreams too strange to share aloud. The family, now fractured and dwindling, created rules. Never acknowledge a door you don't remember. Never enter a hallway that smells of lilac and sulfur. Never, under any circumstances, follow. Woo the sound of your own name if it echoes from the wrong direction. These rules were passed like scripture, with the solemnity of ritual, and yet none of them stopped the room. It continued to appear. Not nightly, not predictably, but like a tide governed by emotion. It appeared to the lonely, to the grieving, to the curious, and each time it promised something. Answers, reunion, understanding, and each time it took something instead. Some returned from it, changed. One boy came back unable to speak, forever tracing circles into the wallpaper with his finger. A woman reappeared 3 days after vanishing, smiling eerily and asking for her father, who had died 30 years before. She could not recall her name. She thought the year was 18. The room had done something to her mind, rewound it, reshaped it. Others left behind only echoes, faint voices heard behind walls, shadows that didn't match the people casting them, and the smell of old, wet stone. By the turn of the century, the Dunbridge family had shrunk to fewer than a dozen. Those who remained either fled or went mad. The house was no longer a home. It was a cage, a shrine to a hungry idea that masqueraded as architecture. The room, they now believed, was not part of the house but the reason the house existed. Elijah had not built it for shelter. He had built it to contain something, or, worse, to invite something in. And whatever it was, it wanted witnesses. By the fall of 1894, the Dunbridge family had thinned to just 6. Jonathan, the last male heir of Elijah's bloodline, his sister Josephine, a widowed recluse with eyes that never quite met yours, and 4 children between them. Jonathan's daughters Edith and Louise, ages 11 and 9, and Josephine's sons, Walter, 14, and Franklin, only 7, all of whom had spent their short lives inside the house, never attending school, rarely leaving the grounds, and utterly convinced that their home was unlike any other in the world, not because of grandeur or history, but because of how the walls listened, how the floors sometimes pulsed underfoot like breath, and how every family meal was haunted by the unspoken reality that something in the house was awake and always had been. By now, the Dunbridges no longer attempted to explain it away. They had learned, through generations of loss and madness, that the house, and more precisely, the extra room that never held still, could not be reasoned with, mapped or dismissed. They no longer drew diagrams or discussed strange dreams aloud. Instead, they adopted rituals, knocks before opening any door, candles lit and placed in windowsills during certain nights of the month, windows kept closed even in the heat of summer. Edith was the first to go. It was just after dusk, on November 3rd, 1894, during the last stretch of orange twilight, before the northern Vermont cold settled in for winter. She had gone upstairs to retrieve her sketchbook from the library, a place she was often warned not to go after dark, not because of ghosts, but because the house changed shape with the moon. The others remembered hearing her voice, a soft hum she always used when she was alone, followed by a creak on the staircase that seemed to echo longer than it should have. And then silence. When they called for her, no answer came. They checked every room, all 23 they could access, and still, no Edith. They even tried to find the 24th, desperate and afraid, willing for once to speak its name aloud, hoping perhaps to bargain with it, but the room did not show itself. It never did when they were ready. It always waited until they were broken. Louise, her younger sister, did not cry. She simply stood by the window for hours afterward, her lips moving as if in prayer or repetition. That night she whispered to the wind, "She's not gone. She's behind the wall." Jonathan sealed the library, nailed the door shut, covered the threshold with salt and old family Bibles. But it did nothing, because 4 days later Alter disappeared. He had been in the study, writing in his diary, and when Josephine entered with tea, the chair was still warm, the pen still wet, but he was gone. There were no open doors, no cracked windows, just the faint odor of soil and burnt paper. His diary was left open to a half-written sentence. "The room watches the ones who remember." The next day, Louise began to speak of the shifting again. She said she had seen the library door move slightly, as though breathing. She said there was a new corridor near the west wing, one that pulsed with warmth even though no heat was lit. Josephine begged Jonathan to leave. "We're not protecting them anymore," she said. "We're feeding it." But he refused. "We cannot run from blood," he said. "It'll follow us wherever we go." And he was right, in a way, though he didn't understand how deeply the house had already rooted itself into their lineage. Not just in name, but in memory, in instinct, in the very way their dreams unfolded. Then, on the 6th day, Louise vanished. Josephine found her shoes by the door, laces undone. Her nightgown was folded at the foot of her bed, as if she had undressed to step into something else. There was a smear of gray ash on her pillow, and in the corner of the room her dolls had been arranged into a perfect circle, each one facing inward, as if attending a ceremony. That was when the rest of the family broke. Jonathan and Josephine, mad with grief, packed what little they could carry, and left the Dunbridge house on a pale March morning in 1895, leaving the candles still lit, the beds still made, the doors wide open behind them as if the house might swallow itself in their absence. They fled to Boston, then farther west, changing their names, cutting all ties. They never spoke of the house again. Josephine died in a sanitarium. Jonathan drank himself into silence. Franklin, the last surviving child, never spoke after that winter. He lived in a home for mute boys until the age of 32, where he finally hanged himself using the torn pages of a family Bible as rope. And so Dunbridge House stood silent, untouched, but not empty. No one claimed the property. No one would buy it, and yet it never aged. It refused to rot. The shutters held. The paint did not peel. The windows, boarded up by the last family gardener, remained unbroken. Snow collected in neat symmetry on the rooftop every winter, and not once did the weight collapse the old beams. The chimney still puffed smoke some nights, faint and thin, though no one had stoked a fire there in decades. Children in nearby towns told stories of a light that flickered behind the attic glass on foggy evenings, or a piano chord drifting on the wind at midnight. Some spoke of a woman's voice calling out names of children who had never lived in the region but sounded strangely familiar. By 1932, a local historian named Peter Macellum from Montpellier, curious and emboldened by skepticism, ventured into the house with his assistant, a young woman named Greta Wells. They were determined to debunk the myths and produce a full architectural survey. They brought with them cameras, measuring wheels, and journals. The first floor was as expected, dusty, grand, but frozen in time. Family portraits stared blankly. Dishes remained in cabinets. Even the books had not yellowed. But on the second floor, something shifted. Peter entered the east corridor alone, camera in hand, and did not return. Greta claimed to hear his scream from behind a closed door, a scream so sharp and sudden it seemed to cut through the wallpaper. She tried to open every room. She called his name until her voice gave out. Hours passed. Then, at the top of the third floor, in a hallway that she swore had not been there the day before, she found Peter's hat. Just the hat. No blood. No prints. No Peter. The hallway ended in a wall. She left that night and never went back. Her notes were scattered, frantic, mentions of rooms that reappeared upside down, of the grandfather clock chiming 13 times, of her reflection in the mirror mouthing different words than her own. She would spend the rest of her life drawing that hallway, from memory, convinced that somewhere behind that false wall Peter was still screaming. After that, no official investigations were made. The county classified the property as condemned but unfit for demolition. Contractors refused to even step foot on the lot. Reports surfaced over the years. Hikers who heard whispers in the fog, a drifter who emerged from the woods covered in blood with no memory of the last 3 days, a delivery driver who claimed he saw the windows watching him as he passed. The family line, what little remained of it, had withered. Those who shared the blood carried a quiet madness, sterile marriages, suicides, stillbirths. No children were born to the Dunbridge name after 1907. Those who carried it by marriage either died young or vanished in remote places with no records. It was as if the name itself had been cursed into extinction. The last known Dunbridge, a woman named Eleanor May, died in 1967 in Ohio, having spent her life in libraries, obsessed with ancient geometry and forgotten cathedrals. In her will, she ordered that the house in Vermont never be sold, entered, or studied. She left behind only one object: a music box carved with 24 panels, each depicting a room. One of them, carved in deeper than the rest, had no door. It was just a black square. When wound, the box played no tune, only static. No one knows where it is now, and still the house waits. It is not rotting, it is not decaying. It is preserving something, perhaps a memory, perhaps a hunger. But those who pass by swear that it is not empty. Lights flicker, shadows move, and in some places, just some, you can still hear children laughing behind the walls, as though the house is not abandoned, but occupied by something that does not understand time as we do, something that remembers, something that collects. And most chilling of all, something that has never stopped building, because though the house has 23 rooms that the living can count, those who have stepped too far and say the number changes, say that there are now 26, or 31, or more, and that if you listen, really listen, you'll hear the house rearranging at night, boards groaning, walls inhaling, as if the house is still deciding where to put the next room, or whom to build it for. It began again, as all things tied to the Dunbridge name seemed to, with a pull, a quiet, inescapable sensation of gravity, as though something long buried was calling softly through blood, not voice, whispering not to the ears, but to something older, ancestral, hidden beneath rationality. And in the early spring of 1972, that pull found its final vessel in Margaret Dunbridge, a 34-year-old journalist, part-time folklorist, and one of the last living descendants of the cursed family tree. Though she had never met another Dunbridge and had spent her entire life hearing only fragments, rumors, cautions, inexplicable family silences, the kind that hang around dinner tables like ghosts too polite to interrupt the meal, and yet when she stumbled upon an article referencing a sealed property in Vermont, condemned, unsold, and oddly pristine despite decades of neglect, she felt that pull, like a current under the surface of still water, and within weeks she had tracked down the trust responsible for the Dunbridge estate, made arrangements, signed liability waivers, and packed her belongings with the kind of calm urgency reserved for those about to do something irrational but necessary. And on May 14, 1972, she arrived at the edge of the Ashevale forest alone, a tape recorder, 2 cameras, 6 blank notebooks, and a box of fresh typewriter ribbons in her trunk. With no idea that the next 6 days would not only unravel the final threads of her identity, but would also seal the fate of the house in ways no fire, no demolition, no legal measure ever could. The house greeted her in silence, not abandoned, but expectant, its windows dark and hungry, its front door unlocked despite the chains that should have bound it, and, stepping across the threshold, Margaret wrote in her first entry, "The house feels less like something forgotten and more like something waiting. There is no dust, no smell of mildew. The floors creak not with age but with awareness, like the groan of lungs beneath a heavy quilt." The first night passed quietly, too quietly. Her bedroom was pre-selected, the second-floor west corner, the one that used to be Josephine's sewing room. She lit no fire, but the air was warm. She made note of the unnatural stillness, how the house lacked the usual ticks and sighs of an old building, and instead pulsed with an eerie calm, as though it were holding its breath. The next morning she explored, camera in hand, every step documented. She mapped the house, finding 23 rooms exactly, as the official record stated: library, drawing room, kitchen, parlor, 7 bedrooms, and more. She noted some inconsistencies, dimensions that didn't quite align, doors that led to places she hadn't yet entered, but nothing too blatant. She chalked it up to structural age. But that night, as she lay in bed, she heard footsteps above her, slow, deliberate, but impossibly heavy. There was no attic above her, only roof. And yet the steps went on for nearly an hour. Day 2's journal entry simply read, "Heard movement overhead. Went upstairs. Nothing there. Found a door behind the kitchen I didn't see yesterday. It's locked. Feels wrong." On day 3, the door was gone. Not just locked, missing. In its place was a narrow hallway she did not remember seeing in her blueprints. She followed it 27 paces before it opened into a strange chamber with dark red walls and no windows, and in that room, faint markings on the floor, symbols she couldn't understand at first, but later matched to the same chaotic geometry found in the journals of Clara Dunbridge. The tape recorder captured her reaction. Something's not right. This hallway, it bends. I don't know how to explain it. It's like space is folding, but my eyes aren't catching up. I feel dizzy. She left the Hatta way, but the room never appeared again, no matter how many times she retraced her steps. That night, she began to hear breathing. Soft, rhythmic, from just beyond the door of her room. She would open it. Nothing. Then close it again. The breathing returned. On day 4, she stopped writing in paragraphs. Her notes became disjointed, scattered. She wrote the same phrase 12 times. It's not haunted, it's remembering. She began to feel watched, not by a presence, but by the walls themselves, which seemed subtly reshaped each morning. Corners that hadn't been there before, shadows that pointed in the wrong direction, cold air that seeped from beneath closed doors. She checked her cameras. The photographs were blurry, as though the rooms themselves refused to be captured. The film warped. Her tape recordings crackled with static, though they played clearly when tested outside. On day 5, she discovered something that finally shattered the last of her logic. In the sealed desk drawer of Elijah Dunbridge's old study, hidden beneath layers of false bottoms and nailed compartments, she found the original architectural blueprints, dated 1811, signed in Elijah's own handwriting. They showed a house of 18 rooms, no east parlor, no red hallway, no tower room, no library annex. She laid the blueprints across the dining table and wept. The house was larger than it had ever been. She counted 26 rooms now, 26 she could access. How many more had she not yet found? Or worse, how many more had not yet found her? That evening, she set up a voice recorder in the central hallway, left it running overnight, and when she played it back the next morning, she heard her own voice whispering. Only it wasn't her. She was asleep the entire night, but the voice matched her tone, her pitch, her patterns. It said, "Come downstairs. There's a room now." On day 6, there was no journal entry, only a single cassette recording, recovered weeks later when search teams arrived to find the house completely still. Margaret's bags unpacked, her notebooks stacked neatly, but ticking no sign of her. The recording is 11 minutes long. In it, She speaks in a calm but nervous voice. "This is Margaret Dunbridge. Time, 6:43 p.m. I've entered what appears to be a room with no windows. It wasn't here before. I followed a hallway past the old scullery, and there was a door, a blue door. It opened on its own. The air it's colder. Not just cold, thick. There are markings on the wall, same as Clara's drawings. Something is written here, but I can't read it. It's not a language. There's a pause. Footsteps. Her breath quickens. I hear something. A breath. It's behind me, but I don't want to look. The air just dropped. 10 degrees. Maybe more. There's a sound behind me. A door. A click. A heavy thud. Silence. Then, faintly, a scraping noise. And then nothing. The tape ends with the sound of a door closing. Her car remained in the driveway, her personal items untouched. But Margaret was never found. No footprints, no trace. The hallway she described was no longer there. The blue door did not exist. And yet the tape was real. Still is. Stored in an archive, though its contents are classified now, restricted to those with university clearance. The Dunbridge house was finally sealed. Iron plates on every entrance. Concrete poured over the cellar doors. Cameras installed, though none work for more than a few minutes. The footage corrupts. The feed dies. Some say the house has gone quiet. Others say the opposite, that it is louder now, but only to those with Dunbridge blood, and that if you stand near the property line and close your eyes, you'll hear your name spoken from a room that should not exist. But here's what no one knows, what the journals never said, what Margaret didn't get to finish. The room isn't simply haunted. It doesn't hold ghosts. It is the ghost. It is memory incarnate. A psychic fossil, a spatial cancer grown from centuries of grief, secrecy, and spiritual weight. It is a room not built, but born, from attention, from inheritance, from longing, and it moves not like an object, but like a concept, a sentient knot of time, saying, stitched into architecture. It remembers every footstep, every name, every child's breath, and with each person who acknowledges it, it grows more certain of its shape, more solid in its design. The Dunbridges thought they were cursed, but they were simply the scaffolding, the structure. A family tree used as an anchor for something that could not exist otherwise. Elijah didn't build the house to contain the room. The room used Elijah to build itself a house, one body at a time. And now that the family is gone, it waits again. Not asleep, but suspended. Listening for the next echo of its name. The next whisper in blood. The next Dunbridge who steps too close to its memory and feels that ancient pull, that quiet tug in the soul that says, there is a door behind the wall, and you were always meant to open it. The house still stands, its windows blank, its shutters tight, and the grass never grows more than an inch around the foundation. Locals avoid it. Real estate agents lie about its coordinates. It is not forgotten. It is intentionally unremembered. But late at night, on the darkest days of the calendar, if you place your ear to the ground outside the house, some say you can still hear the floorboards creak, even though no one walks them. And if you press your hand to the stone, you might feel warmth, like breath trapped inside a mouth that hasn't spoken in decades. And if you are truly cursed, truly marked, truly seen, you might catch a glimpse through a crack in the shutter of a door that wasn't there yesterday, painted in a shade of blue that bruises the eye, and if that door opens, don't step through. Don't answer. Don't listen. Because the house does not want visitors. It wants witnesses. It wants memory. It wants to finish its story. And now, after all these years, it only needs one more room, one more name, and maybe yours.